Once considered the steady and resolute face of labor, Keir Starmer now finds himself cornered, publicly humiliated, and facing a moment no one could have predicted: either confront the nation with full transparency or step down in disgrace. The calls for his resignation are no longer whispers in dimly lit corridors, they are deafening roars echoing outside Parliament, chants rising from city streets, and demands spilling from every corner of British society. What started as an ordinary parliamentary session has rapidly escalated into what political insiders are now describing as a constitutional crisis unfolding live. The Speaker lost control, accusations flew like fire, and at the epicenter of this storm stood Starmer himself, pale-faced and flanked by a party fraying at the edges. This is not merely a political miscalculation. It is a collapse of credibility and authority, a moment where public trust evaporates, leaving a vacuum of moral and political leadership. The outrage ignited with a leak, an internal document, hidden deep within party files, that was never intended for public eyes, certainly not to be read aloud in the Commons. But at precisely 11 a.m., it landed in the hands of a rebellious MP, one of Starmer's own, who read it aloud line by line, voice trembling yet defiant. The memo, stamped and signed, revealed sweeping plans to sidestep internal votes and push through controversial policy changes, immigration caps, expansion of surveillance, and secretive agreements with foreign investors, some allegedly tied to regimes infamous for human rights abuses. And the most damning line of all, the one that shattered the chamber's composure: electability over ethics. Gasps erupted, the Speaker pounded the gavel, yet the damage was irreversible. Parliament spiraled into chaos as Conservative MPs jeered, calling Starmer a coward in silk, while SNP members protested, chanting for a full inquiry. Even veteran Labour backbenchers sat in stunned silence, their faces etched with betrayal. This was no longer politics, it was exposure. The illusion of control shattered in real time, and the man once hailed as Labour's moral compass now appeared abandoned, a captain left behind by his crew. By midday, social media was ablaze. Hashtags like #StarmerResign and #LabourLeak trended globally. Protesters gathered outside Parliament holding signs reading, "We voted for integrity, not power plays." The betrayal cut to the core of Starmer's carefully constructed image. He had promised clean politics, steady leadership, and moral restoration after the Corbyn era, but one leaked document had demolished all of it. It wasn't the opposition that destroyed him, it was the paper trail of his own party. Then came the unthinkable. Angela Rayner, his deputy, walked out of the chamber mid-session. No explanation, no words, just a piercing glance toward the front bench before exiting. The cameras captured every moment, the message was unmistakable. Unity within the party had crumbled. Sources claimed she had been blindsided by policy decisions she had not approved, witnessing what many now call a technocratic dictatorship unfold before her eyes. Downing Street maintained an eerie silence. Rishi Sunak's aides refused comment, though insiders hinted that Number 10 was quietly preparing for a snap realignment. The Prime Minister, once criticized for low approval ratings, now observed his political adversaries consuming themselves. But this was no Tory victory. This was a national crisis. Even the monarchy was stirred. Palace officials confirmed King Charles had taken note of the escalating unrest. While publicly neutral, the statement served as a subtle warning. Britain's stability was under threat, and the institution above politics was watching closely. For a nation already battered by the cost of living crisis, NHS strikes, and a fractured asylum system, this felt like a final, profound betrayal, not just by a political party but by the very principles of representative democracy. Grassroots labor groups issued coordinated letters of condemnation, union leaders temporarily suspended donations, and ordinary citizens spoke out in disbelief. One retired NHS nurse told Sky News, "I trusted him. We all did. He promised us light and delivered backroom darkness." By 3 p.m., Starmer's office issued a brief statement claiming commitment to transparency and accountability, but the words rang hollow. The public wanted consequences, justice, and real action, not vague platitudes. Across the country, Labour's local machinery faltered. Councillors resigned, candidates withdrew, and the gears that had long sustained Labour's presence at the grassroots seized up. The question loomed over Westminster like smoke in a burning room: could Keir Starmer survive this night, or would the streets of London and the waves of public outrage write the final chapter of his leadership? Every passing second became a countdown toward either political oblivion or total transformation. Phones rang incessantly, staffers packed their desks, some slipping out side exits as the mood in Labour HQ grew post-apocalyptic, like survivors fleeing a sinking ship. No press briefings, no spin, no attempts at damage control, just deafening silence. In Parliament, journalists avoided MPs, eyes cast downward, as if the building itself were collapsing. Then, at 4:37 p.m., a whistleblower allegedly from within Starmer's communications team sent encrypted documents to multiple press outlets. The files, verified and timestamped, contained detailed plans to neutralize dissenting members and blacklist those insufficiently loyal. These were real MPs, democratically elected, now marked for political erasure for questioning leadership. The story mutated instantly from an ethics scandal to one of authoritarianism, tyranny dressed in a red tie. Public reaction was volcanic. News channels flooded with calls, social media exploded, and ordinary citizens demanded answers. Had Labour become what it once pledged to destroy? Some MPs named in the blacklist went into hiding, one even receiving threats after false accusations of leaking. Insiders confirmed many targeted were simply principled critics. In Starmer's Labour, dissent had become punishable. The twist came at 6:02 p.m. David Lammy, Shadow Foreign Secretary and Starmer ally, held an impromptu press conference outside Portcullis House. No podium, no flags, only reporters and flashing cameras. His voice was steady, but grief and outrage burned beneath the surface. I cannot in good conscience defend a leadership that treats internal democracy as an obstacle rather than a cornerstone. This is not why I entered politics. This is not what the Labour movement stands for. I am calling for an emergency leadership review effective immediately. Lammy's words fractured Starmer's inner circle. Headlines went nuclear: Lammy breaks ranks. Labour civil war erupts. Leadership review imminent. Across the country, local branches erupted in rebellion. Meetings turned fiery as members screamed, waved their membership cards, and tore them in protest. Labour's grassroots revolt was in full force. By evening, crowds amassed outside Starmer's constituency offices. In Holborn and Street Pancras, what began as a handful of protesters swelled to over 2,000 chanting, "Resign now! Resign now!" Pensioners, students, NHS workers, ordinary citizens who had long supported Labour demanded accountability. Starmer himself vanished, rumours spreading of private estates, crisis meetings, or even a resignation speech in preparation. His silence fueled the fire, deepening public fury. By dawn, Britain felt irreversibly altered. The sacred trust between elected representatives and citizens had been shattered in full view. Starmer, once a barrister promising dignity and renewal, now faced accusations not merely of scandal but of betrayal and moral cowardice. The media was relentless. The Times led with Labour in meltdown, the Daily Mail branded him Sir Keir the Silent, and the Guardian's editorial demanded accountability. BBC flagship programming adjusted to cover live interviews with former Labour MPs, union leaders, and outraged constituents. The repeated message was clear. Resignation, transparency, and action were demanded. Starmer remained silent. No tweets, no statements, no press conferences, his absence a haunting symbol of failure to lead. Behind the locked doors of Labour HQ, an emergency summit convened. Lawyers, advisors, and loyal MPs debated survival strategies, damage control, and potential reshuffles, but the genie was already out. The grassroots, unions, and moderates were united in moral fury. As regional Labour chapters issued no confidence motions, over 70 local branches formally rejected Starmer's leadership, and more than a third of the shadow cabinet resigned or suspended roles. Union leaders declared catastrophic loss of faith. Conservative MPs called for a full parliamentary inquiry. Sunak, measured but pointed, asked, If Starmer cannot lead his own party, how can he lead the nation? Mass demonstrations erupted across the UK, with tens of thousands in Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, and Trafalgar Square demanding accountability. Signs read, "Restore democracy. We want leaders, not managers. No more silent betrayals." The movement was post-partisan, fueled by collective disillusionment and betrayal. Then, Major Colin Harris, a retired Army officer with no prior political platform, addressed the crowd. His voice carried restrained fury as he condemned dishonor in leadership, calling out every backroom deal, silenced MP, and voter betrayed by lies. The public's response was not anger alone, but sorrow, solidarity, and defiance. At 5:27 p.m., after more than 30 hours of silence, Starmer finally appeared outside Labour HQ. Cameras flashed as he stepped forward, facing the consequences of a political maelstrom that had exposed not just a party in freefall, but a nation questioning whether anyone in Westminster still truly served the people, or if the machinery of power had turned inward, consuming itself at the expense of democracy and trust. The countdown to either Starmer's political death or redemption had begun, and Britain watched, silent but seething, as a crisis of unprecedented magnitude unfolded. Every decision, every word, every gesture would now be measured against the betrayal, the revolt, and the moral reckoning that had gripped the nation, leaving an indelible mark on the country's democratic conscience. Once hailed as the unshakable, composed face of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer now finds himself trapped in a whirlwind of public humiliation, cornered by events no one could have predicted, forced to choose between confronting the nation with complete transparency or stepping down in ignominy. The calls for his resignation are no longer hushed murmurs in quiet corridors. They have erupted into deafening roars echoing across the streets outside Parliament, chants swelling in city centres, and demands cascading from every corner of British society. What began as an ordinary parliamentary session has rapidly spiraled into what political insiders are describing as a constitutional crisis unfolding live on national television. The Speaker lost control, accusations flew like wildfire, and at the heart of the storm stood Starmer himself, pale-faced and flanked by a party fracturing before the public eye. This is not just a political stumble, it is a dramatic collapse of credibility and authority, a profound moment where public trust evaporates, leaving behind a vacuum of moral and political leadership that threatens to consume the man who once symbolized integrity and stability. The firestorm began with a leak. An internal document buried deep within Labour Party files, never intended for public consumption, certainly not for a live reading in the House of Commons. At precisely 11 a.m., the document landed in the hands of a rebellious MP, one of Starmer's own, who read it aloud, line by line, with a voice that trembled but refused to yield. The memo, signed and stamped, revealed plans to bypass internal votes and push through sweeping policy changes without consent. Strict immigration caps, a vast expansion of surveillance powers, and clandestine agreements with foreign investors, some linked to regimes notorious for human rights abuses. And the line that would shatter the chamber's composure, electability over ethics. Gasps erupted across the room, the speaker slammed the gavel repeatedly, but the damage had already been done. Parliament descended into chaos as Conservative MPs jeered, labeling Starmer a coward in silk, while SNP members rose in protest, demanding a full inquiry. Even veteran Labour backbenchers sat in stunned silence, faces etched with shock and betrayal. This was no longer conventional politics, it was exposure at its most raw, the illusion of control crumbling in real time, and the man once celebrated as Labour's moral compass now looked like a captain abandoned by his crew in the eye of a storm. By midday, social media had ignited. Hashtags like #StarmerResign and #LabourLeak trended globally. Protesters swarmed outside Parliament, waving signs declaring, "We voted for integrity, not power plays." The betrayal struck at the very heart of Starmer's carefully crafted image. He had built his reputation on promises of clean politics, steady leadership, and moral restoration after the tumultuous Corbyn years, yet one leaked document destroyed it all. It was not the opposition that had undone him, it was the paper trail of his own party. Then came the unthinkable. Angela Rayner, his deputy, walked out of the chamber mid-session. No words, no explanation, just a piercing glance toward the front bench before she exited. The cameras captured it all, the message was unmistakable. Party unity had fractured. Sources claimed she had been blindsided by policy decisions she had not approved, witnessing what many insiders now describe as a technocratic dictatorship unfolding in real time. Downing Street remained eerily silent. Rishi Sunak's aides refused comment, though sources suggested Number 10 was quietly preparing for a potential snap political realignment. The Prime Minister, previously criticized for low approval ratings, now watched as his political adversaries devoured themselves. Yet this was no Tory victory, this was a crisis for the country. Even the monarchy was stirred. Palace officials confirmed that King Charles had taken notice of the escalating unrest. While maintaining public neutrality, the statement acted as a subtle warning: Britain's stability was under threat, and the institution above politics was watching closely. For a nation already battered by the cost of living crisis, NHS strikes, and a broken asylum system, this felt like a final, profound betrayal, a rupture not only in party politics but in the fundamental principles of representative democracy itself. Grassroots labor groups released coordinated letters of condemnation, union leaders temporarily suspended donations, and ordinary citizens expressed disbelief and disillusionment. One retired NHS nurse told Sky News, "I trusted him. We all did. He promised us light and delivered backroom darkness." By 3 p.m., Starmer's office issued a brief statement pledging commitment to transparency and accountability, but the words rang hollow. The public demanded consequences, justice, and action, not vague, evasive rhetoric. Across the country, Labour's local machinery began to falter. Councillors resigned, candidates withdrew, and the mechanisms that had long sustained Labour's grassroots presence started grinding to a halt. Over Westminster, a question hung like smoke from a burning room: could Keir Starmer survive this night, or would public outrage and the relentless streets of London write the final chapter of his leadership? Every second passed as a countdown toward political obliteration or the chance for total reinvention. Phones rang off the hook, staffers packed up their desks, and some slipped quietly through side exits as Labour HQ assumed a post-apocalyptic atmosphere, reminiscent of survivors fleeing a sinking ship. No press briefings, no spin, no attempts at damage control, just deafening, damning silence. In Parliament, journalists avoided MPs, heads cast downward, as if the building itself was crumbling. Then, at 4:37 p.m., a whistleblower, allegedly from within Starmer's communications team, released encrypted documents to multiple press outlets. Verified and timestamped, these files exposed plans to neutralize dissenting MPs and blacklist those deemed insufficiently loyal. Real elected officials, representing real communities, were marked for political erasure simply for questioning leadership. Overnight, the narrative shifted from ethics scandal to authoritarianism, tyranny clad in a red tie. Public reaction was immediate and explosive. Newsrooms were flooded with calls, social media platforms erupted, and ordinary citizens demanded answers. Had Labour become the very entity it once promised to dismantle? Some MPs named in the blacklist went into hiding, one even faced threats after being falsely accused of leaking documents. Insiders confirmed that many targeted were principled critics, not whistleblowers. In Starmer's Labour, dissent had become a punishable offence. The situation escalated further at 6:02 p.m. when David Lammy, Shadow Foreign Secretary and one of Starmer's closest allies, held an impromptu press conference outside Portcullis House. No podium, no backdrop, just Lammy standing among reporters and flashing cameras, his voice steady but layered with grief and outrage. "I cannot in good conscience defend a leadership that treats internal democracy as an obstacle rather than a cornerstone. This is not why I entered politics. This is not what the Labour movement is meant to be. I am calling for an emergency leadership review effective immediately." Lammy's words fractured Starmer's inner circle. Headlines exploded: Lammy breaks ranks. Labour civil war erupts. Leadership review imminent. Across the country, local branches erupted into revolt. Meetings became fiery battlegrounds as members screamed, waved, and tore their membership cards in protest. Labour's grassroots revolt had erupted into full force. By evening, crowds gathered outside Starmer's constituency offices. In Holborn and Street Pancras, a handful of protesters quickly swelled to more than 2,000 chanting, "Resign now! Resign now!" Pensioners, students, NHS workers, and longtime Labour supporters demanded accountability. Starmer himself had vanished, fueling speculation that he was holed up in private estates, attending crisis meetings, or drafting a resignation speech. His silence only fanned the flames of public anger. By dawn, Britain felt irrevocably changed. The sacred trust between citizens and their elected representatives had been shattered in full view. Starmer, once a barrister promising dignity and renewal, now faced accusations not only of scandal but of moral cowardice and betrayal. The media response was relentless. The Times led with Labour in meltdown, the Daily Mail labelled him Sir Keir the Silent, and the Guardian's editorial called for immediate accountability. BBC programming was rearranged to host continuous interviews with former Labour MPs, union leaders, and enraged constituents. The message was uniform and unequivocal: resignation, transparency, and action were demanded. Starmer remained silent. No tweets, no statements, no press conferences. His absence became a symbol of failed leadership. Behind closed doors at Labour HQ, an emergency summit convened.